evening. This is the December 12, 2006 meeting of the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. The time is 7:07 p.m. The board consists of 5 members and 1 alternate who couldn't be present this evening. However, present this evening are members Greg Lavelle, Roger Gruser, Betty Hollow, and John Golsey. I'm Muriel Frederick, the chair. Also present this evening are zoning administrator Steve Pearson and Paul Eschenbacher, the acting secretary. The board operates according to the following procedure. The chair will name and describe the case. The zoning administrator will cite specifics of the refusal. The appellant or representative then will state the case for granting the appeal. Testimony next will be taken from those who support granting of the appeal, then those who wish to speak in general comment, and those who would support denial of the appeal. Following all testimonies, the board will receive concluding remarks from the appellant. Discussion from the floor then will be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. Under Athens City Code, Section 230703B, the board has the power to grant such variances from the code as will not be contrary to the public interest, so that the spirit of the code shall be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. Athens City Code Section 230910C requires that variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of fact based directly on the evidence provided to it, that each and every one of the following 6 criteria are met. Number 1 is the practical difficulty or undue hardship. There must exist a practical difficulty or undue hardship caused by exceptional circumstances pertaining to the specific piece of property. Number 2, exceptional circumstances. There must exist exceptional circumstances or conditions applying to the property or its intended use that do not in general apply to properties in the same zoning district. Preservation of equal property rights. It must be determined that literal interpretation of the code would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity, while granting the variance would not convey special privilege. Minimum variance is number 4. It must be determined that the variance is the minimum required to make reasonable use of the property. And number 5, absence of detriment. It must be determined that the granting of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent properties, nor materially impair the purposes of the code or the public interest. And the last, not of a general nature. The variance sought must not be of a general or recurring nature, such that the situation would more reasonably be handled by changing the law. Any person who's aggrieved by the decision of the board may file an appeal to the Court of Common Pleas. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the board's resolution to the appellant. Tonight there's one case on the agenda. It's number 0625V for 102 West Union Street, Zone B1. Abdi Sheikh is the appellant. The board is required by law to take testimony under oath. Anyone wishing to speak, please stand to be sworn. Okay. Do you swear that the testimony you will give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Steve, you all last month, you told us what the reasons for the refusal were, but do you have some new information to add to that this evening? Sure. Okay.
At the last meeting, you received at that meeting from Mr. Bill Morgan, an adjacent property owner, a sketch that he believed was the possibility of installing parking on the lot.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned at the time that if new parking were installed, it'd have to meet the landscape requirements. And so during that time, between the last meeting and now, I met with the tree commission and had them look at the site because if parking were installed this way, the tree commission would have to grant a consolidation permit. Rather than go ahead and design any kind of parking area or how many cars could be parked there, I thought I'd go to the tree commission first. One thing I would like to say in this drawing, There's an illustration essentially of a van as opposed to a car sitting right here. It appears that from the property line to a fence, from this property line over to a fence that's right here, there's a 9-foot width right now where two vehicles could be stacked behind each other.
Yep.
And that's essentially in this area where this van's illustrated here.
And that's on the property that's requesting the variance.
Right.
Okay.
But once again, it's between that sort of barrier curb and the fence.
Right.
Okay.
Without knowing for sure, I'm going to assume the backside of that curb is the property line or thereabouts. And there's about 9 feet, which is the minimum width of a parking stall between the backside of that curb and the fence on the subject property.
Right.
Also, in order to install a parking area, as I'd mentioned at the last meeting, an 8-foot buffer of trees or landscaping and trees is required adjacent to the front wherever there's not a curb cut. And that would, in effect, completely remove that parking spot right there where that first car is illustrated. The landscape ordinance would require a 8-foot buffer and trees in that area. Additionally, the landscape ordinance would require a 4-foot buffer against the adjacent A&M property, A&M Reynolds Apartments. 4 feet because it's less than 25 cars or less than 7,000 square feet in area, the pavement would be. So there's a 4-foot required here, 8-foot required on the front.
But there are already trees to the side and 3 in the front.
Right. There's a group of 2 trees close to the end of the fence adjacent to the road and then 1 tree closer to the building. So I reviewed this with the tree commission, and then I did email you a memo from the tree commission about their review and what their recommendation might be. First thing I'd like to clarify is they say that there are 2 healthy thornless honey locusts in the city's right-of-way beside the sidewalk. I think that's on the property and not in the right-of-way. The face of those buildings is on the property line, and those trees are back from that. So those trees are there, but I believe they're on the property instead of the right-of-way. And then there are several other trees that basically run right along that fence, which is about 9 feet off the property line with the adjacent property owner. And essentially, this memo just says that they reviewed it and they recommend to the board that a parking variance be granted. Trying to see what else might be in here. If a variance was not granted, I'd have to take this back to the tree commission for them to grant a consolidation permit. And, depending on waiving the front 8-foot buffer that'd be required here and the 4-foot buffer on the side. But if parking went in there, I think as their memo reflects, but if you've been down there and looked at it, all those trees would have to go.
To make a parking place,
To
right?
make a parking area that looked like this.
Right, it would be the trees across the front and along the side, is that?
That's correct, because even if you came in right here where the van's illustrated,
Yeah.
and you came in and turned in, there's essentially a row of trees right there. It'd have to come out so you could even turn
Right.
Yeah.
into those parking spots and park
Would
head-on into the building, perpendicular to the building.
it be possible to have the 2 cars stacked for loading or purposes without removing any trees?
Like I say, there's at least 9 feet in between the backside of that curb and the fence. So 2 vehicles,
Look to
3
me.
small ones could probably stack in there.
Yeah, it looked to me as if it could.
Technically, I
So
think the
you can-
length would only permit 2.
So would you be able to keep the trees that are sort of in the corner?
I believe so, because the clumping of the 2 trees that are
They're
real
very
close to each
close
other,
together.
right at the sidewalk, no, they wouldn't have to be removed. Like I say, between that fence, it appears that between the fence, that wooden fence, and the adjacent property line, which again, assuming is the backside of the curb line, there's at least 9 feet of width, which is
Okay,
the
to
width of
get
a
through
parking
there at
stall.
the front.
And that area accesses the building itself. You go around a corner and would be a supply alley that area we're discussing right now, would it not?
Where do you go around a corner?
Well, I'm not saying, let me see this thing. It looked to me when I was looking at it today as if you drove up here and this area, the fence ends, and there's a space right in here above what would have been the parking lot, which would be access to the building. I mean, if you were driving up here to load, you wouldn't be having to go back down on the sidewalk and load from the front. It looked to me like there was
Oh, I
a
see.
doorway back
Sure.
there that you
Yeah.
would load into.
Oh, yeah, there is a doorway on the side of the building right there.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Yeah, because,
And this would be the loading zone access to that
Right.
doorway.
Yes, that makes sense, because Mr. Morgan said last time that in loading and unloading, they sometimes spilled over into his property. So obviously they were coming up here to do that.
when Union Street Cafe was in there, I remember eating there one time, had lunch with the mayor. We got our food, went through a door right here and out, we went out and ate on the patio. So, and that door, more than likely the state will require that that door swing out toward these cars. If you park cars this way, that door would have to swing out for egress purposes. So you'd be swinging the door out into those cars.
Okay, anybody have questions for Steve?
I have a quick general question. If the trees are not on the city right of way and on the property, and somebody, the owner wants to cut them, do you still have to have the blessing of the tree commission?
No, landscape ordinance does not apply to planting, cutting, or pruning trees or shrubs on private property,
Okay.
just on the city right of way. For example, the tree commission now is involved with the possibility of plantings on the bike path extension. They're involved with some cutting and planting at West 8th Street Park, as examples. The shade tree ordinance does, though, allow for citizens to take advantage of the tree commission if they need some advice, want a consultation, a site visit, or something like that. That's a service that the tree commission can provide to citizens. It's free of charge, and you might get some input from the tree commission. More than likely, they'll send Ann Bonner out. She's the urban forester for this region of the state, and that's a service to citizens. It's free of charge, and I'm sure they're glad to help people with, especially, for example, right now the city's taken an inventory of ash trees on public right-of-ways, because if the emerald ash borer comes and we have to cut those trees down, we have to set some money aside for those cuttings, and then are you going to set money aside also for replanting of some other kind of tree? So that's another function, a big function that the Tree Commission has, is really to help with public trees, but they're glad to help on private property also. If you have an ash tree, it's going to be just, the emerald ash borer doesn't know this one's on the right of way and this one's on your lot. So, if that would come to pass, they could come out and identify ash trees on your property and then give you some recommendations or some ideas about what you might have to do if that infestation does make it to this part of the state.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And we're ready for Mr. Shape to make his presentation.
Actually, I'm here on behalf of my brother, Alicia.
Okay. Would you come to the podium and state your name and address for the record?
My name is Mohammed Sheikh. Address is 4040 North High Street, Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
43214.
Thank you. Okay. And what did your brother authorize you to tell us today about plans for this property?
Well, I'm actually here I know last time was about the parking situation, and Steve said he's going to shed. Steve's supposed to shed some light on the parking situation because of the trees being. Excuse me. Because of trees being an issue, and the gentleman brought up the parking situation last time. So just in terms of the next step in terms of whether to approve us or whether to deny.
I see. So you don't have anything additional to say beyond what Steve has already said?
No, nothing additional, because I think that was the roadblock. That was, I guess, from you guys
Okay.
approving or not approving, from what I understand.
Well,
Last time when I was there.
All right. Well, if you don't have anything that you'd like to say right now, you may later. Does anybody have any questions for?
Well, let me add, I know last time the parking, it was also for delivery trucks and also for patrons for the business. So that was these two main concerns. So I just want to get, an understanding. Was it only for, because there always the possibility that any customer that's coming into the business, any business that's put in there, the possibility of the customers going into his lot is there. But I want to get an understanding if it's, because the drawing last time, if we come into Athens and there's only, from the understanding, 3 cars parking and a van behind it, if we park in that area, that's 3, enough for the employees and what I'm saying is there's no room for customers to park there,
Right.
and I just want to get an idea, from last time, if it was just the delivery truck that he had a problem with, or other people that are parking,
I see.
in that spot for that business from his past experience.
Well, the problem that my understanding anyway, that the reason that you all have to be here is because you are required to have a certain number of parking places. The code doesn't specify that these parking places are specifically for specific things, that you're just required to have a certain number of parking places for your business, given the floor space that your business occupies and the kind of business it is. So that is, whether or not it's parking for a delivery truck or a customer was brought up by someone who was objecting to the possibility of the variance. But if you had, if you want to know what that concern was, I suppose that'll probably come up later.
All right. Thank you.
Since you weren't here last time,
Excuse me?
were
was
you here? You
yeah.
were here. Okay. All right.
Okay, so you did get to hear the conversation last time.
What was that?
You did hear the conversation last time then?
Yeah, well, yeah, I heard it, but,
Yeah.
He raised 2 questions, and putting, the 3 spots there, usually, in any business, the employees, will usually park there. And then, I know that he raised two issues, so, but we'll just, I'll just wait for the gentleman to come back up then.
Okay, well, did you have anything you wanted to say about either of those issues at this time?
Well, I think basically the question was there a possibility of creating parking there? And at the time that we talked last time, only Mr. Morgan seemed to have any dimensions about how much space there actually was, and consequently, what might, in some circumstances, be possible. And so that's why we continue to actually find out. Given the tree commission's land and the landscape ordinance, and given how many trees you would have to buffer this or that, then would it be possible to create parking? And if so, how much?
Okay. I guess I have nothing else to add.
Okay, then at this point, is there anyone here who's wanting to speak in opposition to, or rather in general comment about the variance?
Don't we do 4?
Oh, yeah, 4, but there is 4, okay. Please comment.
David Ingram, 120 Morris Avenue. I'm also a tree commissioner, so if you've got any questions about what the tree commission was thinking when it suggested to you that you should allow the variance, I may be able to answer them for you. I do think, though, there is a strong public interest here in trying to maintain the existing trees, if we can. One of the concerns that I think we have is that, yes, you could re-landscape this and put in new trees, replacement trees, that would conform to a landscape ordinance, but you're going to lose the 10, 20 years worth of life in each of the trees that already exist on that site. Also, just based on the plan that we were shown, if we did have the 8-foot buffer at the front and the 4-foot buffer at the side, you're going to lose 2 of these parking spots anyway. So I don't think you're going to gain 5 parking spots if this thing has to conform to the landscape ordinance.
You basically, what you're saying is you think that instead of 5 parking spaces, you could only provide 3 there.
Probably 3, yeah.
Where currently there are 2.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, but you're not going to get 5
Okay.
out of it. So you would still have to grant a variance, I suspect, regardless of this. And so I would suggest to you that there is a public interest in maintaining the trees you've got there and allowing the variance.
Okay.
And if there are any questions, I'll answer them.
Anyone have any questions about? No? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Then, is there anyone who wants to speak in general comment at this time or in opposition?
I'm Bill Morgan. I live at 36 Cable Lane in Athens, and my partner and I own the property adjacent to this 102 West Union. And may I have give you some? Thank you. The last page is a drawing that you've already got. So that's just information that you've already received. I was trying to figure out how I would like to address this issue, and I thought I'd just go to the 6 points and see how they look to me. So I'll read through this real quick. I know I won't take a lot of your time, but I'll read through this real quick and we'll go from there. The practical difficulty, this is a self-imposed by the owners and tenants of 102 West Union. The area needed for a substantial portion of the parking is available on the site. There's room for 4 spaces, 10 by 18, for 180 square feet each. This would allow over 3 foot of planting of trees between the properties. This plus the trees on the wide sidewalk could satisfy the tree commission. I guess what I'm suggesting off this is that possibly we look to that wide sidewalk as possibly an area for planting. The request for variance should be from 6 cars down to 4 or and less trees. The owner could also request the city place a truck loading zone in 1 space directly in front of the building for deliveries during the workday for 1 to 4 p.m. This loading zone could serve not only the purpose of the proposed cafe, but also the bike shop. Number 2, exceptional circumstances. This should not be exceptional. This is the same requirement as the standard for everyone. A&M Reynolds spent over $70,000 to meet this standard. The standard is routinely applied to uptown businesses. It is part of the setup of a business plan and property planning and funding of a new project. Number 3, preservation of equal rights. What is equal about granting a parking variance when the adjacent neighbor has met the code at a considerable expense? And in fact, if this parking is not provided by the cafe, they will enjoy our parking lot to make deliveries and use as temporary parking, with no regard for safety and convenience for our people authorized to use the parking. I'm going to go make a comment on this. The situation exists now where you have that one driveway. That quickly filled up by the staff of the Union Cafe when they were operating. And at that point, all the delivery trucks pulled into our parking lot. So that's it's not really correct. I mean, they should provide parking for their staff, for their employees, and for any delivery. They should make some parking available for them too. Because if they don't, they're just going to be using our area. And quite frankly, I don't want to support their project. Minimum variance. A minimum variance might be for 2 less parking spaces as long as the city helps out with the loading zone space. This would provide 4 on-site spaces. I would be willing to bet they will quickly fill up and there will be a stacked vehicle in the driveway. So even if they do provide these 4 spaces, as I've shown, they're going to fill up with their staff and they're going to have a couple other cars stacked in there also. Number 5, absence of detriment. If they get the variance, they will use the neighbor's parking. Not of general nature. Quite frankly, I have no idea what this means, but I'm against it or I'm for it, whatever works in our favor. Other points. A statement was made that the cafe will attract only walk-in customers and therefore will not need parking. However, the staff and deliveries for the cafe could exceed 6 spaces. The managers of the proposed cafe are from out of town. Where will they park? The staff will drive to work. Where will they park? Someone mentioned there's plenty of street parking during the lunch. This parking situation uptown has been getting better. This is not because Bureau or the Board of Zoning Appeals is granting lots of variances. Parking will bring the customers to our shops and restaurants and allow our in-town businesses to compete with the malls. C, there was a suggestion that the proposed cafe developers meet with a neighbor. I provided names and phone numbers, but they made no effort to contact me. D, it is too easy to let the tree commission make a recommendation for parking variance. I generally applaud their efforts and successes, but they're not the ones who are going to have to put up with the bad situation. I think our first priority should be to get the cars off the streets, particularly when the site has already 100 trees. If you want to help with the rain runoff from hard surfaces, then they could suggest one of a dozen brick and tile parking surfaces rather than concrete or asphalt that allow water to soak into the ground. We are requesting a denial of the variance as proposed. We would be in favor of a variance to require parking for 4 as long as the city would also provide 1 space for loading and deliveries. And I'll reiterate, I applaud the idea of trees and things, but we have a lot of trees in that area. These trees here represent a certain amount of financial cost and things like this, but they don't nearly come close to the $70,000 that my partner and I put into the parking lot right next to it, which is virtually the same depth as this parking lot is too. So we have 30 feet. So what I'm suggesting is that we were made to meet the code. Many people, many businessmen coming into the community and uptown are made to meet the code. And quite frankly, I'm not sure why we shouldn't make sure that they meet it in this fashion. And I'm willing to back off a little bit in terms of a recommendation for a couple spots.
We are trying to establish exceptional circumstances, and your business in the rental business, you agree that you do need to require parking for your renters 24 hours a day, but exceptional circumstances might be for a cafe that somebody is there for maybe an hour, half hour, 2 hours. It is not as necessary or important as having a rental that you need to provide on a 24/7 basis parking for people.
And I'm suggesting that what we see as a cafe, I don't know what time they're going to open in the morning, what time they're going to shut at night, but during that period of time for the business day, they're going to need parking. They're going to need parking for their cooks and chefs and out-of-town staff and whatever. So they're going to need it for the entire business day. And there is parking along the streets for the lunch crowd and the evening crowd too. That's great, and it's getting better. And the reason it's getting better is because we're requiring businesses to provide parking. So it's true, we provide it 24 hours a day. That was the code. We met the code. So.
And also number 5, the absence of the detriment. Are you assuming that they're going to be using your space, or do you have a previous experience with that? I mean,
we've been there for 12 years, and anytime any business has ever been in that cafe location,
they have used.
They've used it. They've stacked their employees, have used up the driveway immediately.
Well, wasn't the only, during that 12 years, were there other tenants than the Union Street Cafe?
I don't know who else was in there. I can't remember. But whenever that was a business, we had a problem.
assuming that the
We had a
Union
problem with
Street
any
Cafe-
number of things, grease barrels along the property line, trash, any number of things. But big delivery trucks pulling into our area, our tenants being inconvenienced, it's a little unsafe to have them backing in and backing out and whatever.
I have a question for you. Number one, practical difficulty. You're proposing that one of the solutions would be a truck loading zone. Why did you pick the window 1 to 4? Is that when everything's delivered? Or?
I'm saying that I know that in some communities, they require deliveries to be made during a particular time. I also know that uptown, we have particular loading zones, like in front of the theater, that are very specific to a time. So suppose you're ordering restaurant things, and you say to them, I want you to deliver it after the lunch hour.
They would have to coordinate with
Sure.
the delivery people.
It's a suggestion, I'd say
And I'm
we
just
should
curious
provide,
as to why 1 to 4 was the window that you picked,
just,
as opposed to maybe
Arbitrary.
8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon.
well, I was thinking that it is nice to have on-street parking as much as possible. I'm encouraging that, and even though you can go down there any given day, when even the students are here, and still find parking spots along there, that's what's going to bring people to that part of town and compete with the malls. You have to provide the parking, and it has to be there. And so, as I say, I applaud all the parking issues. I didn't particularly like putting all that money into parking, but we did. I'm encouraging it. So, but there's been no suggestions by the owner tenant in this particular variance as to how they're going to handle it. They just want you to give them 6 spaces, and to be free of that. Thank you.
Okay. At this time, there's no one else to speak. Oh, Steve. General comment.
Probably to clarify one thing, where originally it was a request for 0 parking where 6 is required. Going out there and looking at it, it's actually a request for 1 accessible, 1 non-accessible parking spot where 6 are required. So they have 1 that meets the requirements. When you stack another one in behind it, that one doesn't count because it traps the other one in. In reality, you can park 2 cars. So maybe just a little clarification on the variance that might be necessary. The city has loading zones, quite a few places around town. Those are marked by the street department at the direction of the service safety director. Often you'll see the city changing loading zones depending on the use in different buildings and the demand. We've changed uptown parking zones quite often, in particular to accommodate large beer delivery trucks. We've also set aside some motorcycle parking and some taxi stands.
Well, what is the procedure for requesting a loading zone in front of a business?
Usually if a property owner or group of property owners want to do that, they request to the service safety director, and he acts on the advice of the street department and the police department. Sometimes the administration will take that on their own initiative if they see parking problems in some areas. In this particular area, I don't know if it's still there, and I don't know that, if it's been changed, but I can remember at a staff meeting, former Service Safety Director Wayne Key had asked for a loading zone to be established down at Grinders to try to help everybody in that area because there was no loading zone in that area. So to the best of my knowledge, there is a loading zone for everybody in that area down at Grinders because you have Star of India, I think it's called Rio Grande. There's a Mexican restaurant there too. And then you have Grinders. You used to have Union Street Cafe. You do have the cycle path. You have the Cat's Den right there too, getting deliveries. So as I recall, Mr. Key saw a need in that area for a loading zone. And from what I I could run down there in 5 minutes and check and be back, but I think there's a loading zone for that business area in front of Grinders. I remember discussion too about would it create a difficulty in the curve in the road right there? But the road's wide enough that, as far as I know, that loading zone was established down there.
I'm assuming, but maybe you could inform us, Star of India and the saloon and the Mexican restaurant, I assume that they are grandfathered and that they don't have their own parking. Is that right?
That's right. As I mentioned at the last meeting too, prior to the most recent change in the zoning code, there was an exception for businesses, I believe it was under 2,000 square feet in area. They weren't required to have any kind of parking. When the code was revised, that essentially small business parking exception was removed. So it didn't matter what your square footage was. If it was 20 square feet, you had to have parking. So that was a change in the code. The places that are down there now went in prior to that change. And also, even though a business might change in a certain location, as long as it doesn't change use groups, if they have any legal nonconformity, for an example, in this case, parking, that grandfathering continues with the property. And parking is only required if there's a change. That's not the case, however, in this situation, because if this appellant had requested to go in within 1 year of Union Street Cafe moving out, they would still have been grandfathered for parking. They lost their grandfathered parking, grandfathered deficient parking, because more than 1 year went by. I can remember when I came to work for the city 13 years ago, there was a Chinese restaurant there, and when they moved out, Union Street Cafe moved in fairly quickly. As I recall, Union Street Cafe was a 24/7 operation. I know my office ordered delivery from there on occasion, and it was a place to go in the middle of the night to get something to eat when no other place was open. So it's traditionally been an eating establishment. It just happened to lose its grandfathered parking. Let's see. The parking spaces on the street there are 2-hour metered parking spots. So I pulled up there tonight and just pulled right up, and it wasn't, as Mr. Morgan indicated, there doesn't seem to be really a lot of times a parking problem there. But there are, admittedly quite a few uses. The Smiling Skull is in there too. So I don't know where everybody parks when the Smiling Skull's
And the
full.
motorcycle places, I assume.
I'm curious about something gathering from what's been discussed. Would the delivery trucks seem to be the issue? And if that was designated, the parking area that you have now, designated as a delivery parking area, period, then that would be addressed. The trucks could pull in there and load and unload and leave. And the employees, they can always find a parking space. You can ask any employee up on Court Street. They manage to find somewhere to park. And perhaps that would make it more.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that could be enforced. The board could make that a condition. They could post it that way. To me, it would be kind of like bars checking IDs and keeping people from smoking. It would be up to them, essentially, to do their own policing. I could go down and note a violation if the board said it has to be posted, deliveries only there. I suppose I could go down, and if cars were parked there and it wasn't a delivery of,
Normally,
I could cite them for
when someone
violation
has a
of
vested interest in something like that, though, like Mr. Morgan, if he's noting that it's not being used for that, then all he would need to do would be to notify the proper.
I'd like to make a comment on that. I mean, if I need to come up to the stand, I will. Somebody's making assumptions for me, and I'm not feeling comfortable about
Okay,
that.
well, as soon as Steve is finished with his commentary, would you please do that? Okay.
Another thing I'd like to note too, that owners, as Mr. Gruser pointed out, can always mark their parking areas as private parking areas. so long as the posting is in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code for private parking areas. It indicates no parking. It's visible when you pull in. It states the place to where your vehicle may have been towed and a telephone number. So anytime, if a private parking area is posted, you can tow from it.
So you're saying that they could do that to prevent.
Anybody
fraud.
can post
And
their
Mr.
property as
Morgan
private
could also
parking.
do that.
Right.
Mr. Morgan would be able to post his property, you mean, so that people parking there
Sure.
could be towed? Yeah, right.
There's a cost for that, isn't it?
No,
It's gonna cost. What do you mean?
you just,
For posting that sign.
you just have to buy the sign.
No, recently, the Governor Taft in the state transportation bill about 2 or 3 years ago, the towing service companies lobbied the legislature and had the local regulatory authority of municipalities removed. In other words, municipalities now cannot control private parking areas. That's all done now by the Public Utilities Commission. So the city has no involvement now in towaway signs, private towaway signs, towaway areas. The police chief does have a little bit of authority for that, but it's all in the police department now. It's out of the code enforcement office because of change in state law.
When did that happen?
2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4.
Okay.
But that doesn't prevent somebody from putting up a sign.
No, it's the
That's
same.
what they wanna do.
The regulations, the city regulations essentially mirrored the state enabling legislation. It's just that the towing industry lobbied the state legislature and, essentially eliminated municipal jurisdiction over private parking areas, saying that it was an encroachment into interstate commerce. Somehow they convinced the state government that that was true, just like the trucking industry. So local municipality has no regulatory authority now as it relates to towing companies,
But you can
including
still,
private
you can
towing.
still post your property, it just is going to
Right,
be.
you can still do
it'll
it,
be-
everything's the same, the city's just not involved in it now.
I see, okay. All right. Any other questions for Steve? Okay. We may have some others, but thank you. Mr. Morgan?
Just a couple quick comments relative to private parking. I don't want to police their parking. And if someone were parking in our area and they shouldn't be parking there, by the time I would get a complaint from my tenant and call the police or have them call the police and somebody show up, it's possible they would be gone. Just not tenable. That's not the way it should work. The way it should work is, from my perspective, is that the code says they're required to have 6 spaces. A variance means let's maybe cut some slack on a space or 2. But the code says 6 spaces, and it's not just for my delivery areas or their delivery truck using my area. When students are in town and they have friends over or family come to load and unload many times during the year, that street is full. And if we don't provide parking or make sure that every new business that comes in provides the parking as required, then we're going to be going backwards in terms of our parking situation. The reason for the code isn't so somebody doesn't park in my lot with a delivery truck. The reason for the code is to get vehicles off the street. I'm sure you know the reason for the code, but that's my perspective. I don't want to police someone else's parking lot. I'm not going to call. I don't have any right to call if in fact you say, well, they're going to take their space and designate it as delivery only, and I see somebody parking there that's obviously not a truck. I can't call somebody and say, take the truck out of there. That doesn't work that way. That's my understanding. I don't think I can do that.
So what Mr. Morgan is saying in a sense then is that a area can't be designated as loading and unloading and enforced. So the loading and unloading, even if you've got 6 parking spaces, there can be 6 customers or 6 workers, or they're going to be filled up. There still isn't going to be that loading and unloading zone,
That was the reason for the loading out front.
even if you've got 6 parking spaces and don't need a variance.
The board can attach any conditions they want to a variance, and we've had this discussion almost every meeting about if there's some condition attached to parking, how will the code enforcement office enforce that? And all I can tell you is we'll do the best we can do. We would act on a complaint.
But we couldn't attach the condition that we give him a variance if he gets a loading zone out front, because he hasn't the power to provide himself with a loading zone out front.
What I tried to explain was there's this, hopefully as I illustrated, there's
Yeah,
a
there's
series of
one down
steps
the
you have to go through to get a
Yeah.
loading zone. And if there's already one down there in front of Grinders, the service safety director's not going to
Right.
put another one
In
in
other
right
words,
there for a coffee
That's
shop.
not an
How far
option.
up the street is Grinders?
It's about
Actually,
Just
it's
a-
down the street.
four,
It's
it's
down
about,
Half a block.
it's about a
towards
block
Mill.
away.
Yeah, it's basically right across from Depot Street, the turn where you go down into Athens Station
Yeah,
Apartments.
right, okay.
Um,
So it's really not very far.
No, Beasley Mills is right there on the corner across the street. There's a couple houses, and then Union Street Cafe is right across.
So we haven't discussed at all how many deliveries a week a business like a coffee shop would have.
Right, you don't know how many deliveries, and you haven't heard anything about the hours of operation yet.
Right.
Okay.
And one other thing I'd like to point out, no matter what use is proposed for this building, they'll be coming in for a parking variance.
Of course.
This one is most similar to previous uses in the building, but anybody that goes in there is going to need parking variance, or they're going to have to install parking,
Right.
one or the other.
Well, and this is perhaps not quite relevant, but I do expect a lot of their customers will be on foot. Not all, certainly, but it lends itself to that.
Right, and that's why I'd kind of pointed out, well, I suppose that's a good reason to possibly ask the question about how many deliveries are there going to be?
I think we need
What
to
type
know
of
that.
service, what hours of the day? Is this use more or less intense than previous uses that have been there?
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's see if we can hear from you.
Thank you, Steve.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Well,
All right. You've heard the questions. Do you think you can answer them for us?
it was hour of operation. Yeah, from we're gonna from 6 in the morning to midnight.
And how frequently will you receive deliveries during the week?
I know we receive deliveries once a week. Once a week, I'd say.
So will you be serving some kind of food?
Yeah, it's Mediterranean type of food and coffee. So there will be food, but it's not going to be like, it's not the place was already equipped to be a restaurant.
Yeah.
So we might take advantage of that. But right now we're going into as a cafe. So we'll be serving coffee and that kind, coffee and snacks and that kind of stuff.
What is Mediterranean
Prep.
food? It's not, is it like,
Like hummus,
Cookies?
falafel sandwich,
okay,
shawarmas, that kind of stuff.
I see. That does require some cooking then, so you will need,
We get it, like right now what we do is we get it it's already pre-made,
I see.
So they we get it from a Mediterranean restaurant in Columbus.
I see, okay.
Is it true that you all already have a coffee shop in Columbus?
Yes,
And this would be the second one?
yes.
Okay.
And the coffee shop in Columbus, how many deliveries weekly does it take?
Once a week.
Once a week?
Yeah.
And is it operated according to the same hours approximately?
Well, that one's a little different. But I'm the delivery, usually I go out and I get things,
I see.
So I go to Sam's Club and get what we need, and to the Mediterranean restaurant, or once a week from there.
I see, okay.
And how many employees do you anticipate having once you get established?
Starting out with three, actually four employees.
And including either yourself or your brother? There would be
I-
five people?
Including him. Total of four.
Total of four,
Total of four,
including,
yes, yeah,
okay.
including-
At any given time, there would be 4 people in there, or just 4 overall?
Two during the day and,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
so 2 at a time.
yeah, or either one, depending on, the slow times, you probably need like 1 or 2 people. And then shifts overlapping. So the busiest time you have 3 people working.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, that's,
Thank you. Then discussion from the floor is closed, and are we ready to look at are we ready to do a variance statement, or do we want to discuss this further? No further discussion? Does anybody frame this proposal?
Oh, thank you. I move that we grant a variance to the property at 102 West Union Street from section 2311, table B, off-street parking, to permit two parking spaces, but 6 is the required minimum.
One accessible, one non-accessible.
Yes, one accessible and one non-accessible. And do you want to attach any conditions of any sort here?
My only thought about a condition is that this variance be very specific for this particular kind of like it's for a cafe. I know that there are other kinds of uses that could go into that building for this zone, but I would think that other uses might be a little bit heavier use, and
Okay, so with the condition that
As long as
the
this is.
variance
long
be
as-
maintained as long as this use is.
this
in
category
effect.
of use is maintained.
Does that do it?
Does that sound like it reads clearly? You understand my intent here.
Illustrate was, you can have some food service businesses that are more intense than this. If you say the same use group, I would allow any restaurant.
Okay.
Oh, that's what I was afraid you were going to say. I don't mean any
Okay,
restaurant, I
so
mean
long
any,
as,
Light restaurant use, light.
like a cafe,
operation
basically.
cafe.
I'd recommend that it be granted to the appellants. Their heirs, successors are assigned in the same specific business.
okay,
How
how about that?
works for me.
Would you repeat that? What is it now?
When property is transferred and there's some restriction with it, the language that's usually used is that any condition goes to heirs, successors, or assigns.
Okay.
So
So long as,
they could sell the business then,
right,
and somebody else could still continue a coffee shop. It wouldn't be specific to them. It would
Right.
be specific to that use.
okay.
It would not be specific to that property.
And
So it's
which is-
not specific to this particular individual, it's not specific to the
Right.
property, it's specific to the use. So they could sell the
And the
business.
use is as a coffee shop.
Right. As, I guess, in substantial conformance with the testimony.
Right.
tonight.
So,
Okay.
and
'Cause to
substantial
me-
conformance.
4 employees, 1 delivery a week.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is the condition?
Is what Steve said,
What?
which is, let's see. Okay, on the condition that the same use as a coffee shop be maintained, and that,
To the family, I guess, on heirs.
okay, I'm not wording that very
That
well. I
might
need to
cover
back up.
that right there.
Okay. And we could go ahead and say
In
in
the same
conformance
line.
with the testimony that was presented.
So on the condition that the same use as the coffee shop be maintained, and
And
Wasn't in the same ownership or
well,
heirs
I don't
or
think, well, we
anyone?
don't need to say that, because if it's just a coffee shop, then whoever has or whatever, I don't think that needs to be specified. But we're trying to
And in
say,
substantial conformance with
And
the
if-
testimony as given as to its nature and use.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
well, all we need to say, in substantial conformance with the
Okay,
testimony
On the
presented.
condition that the same use as a coffee shop be maintained and in substantial conformance to the testimony given at this meeting.
I think
Yeah,
that's
that'll
what we're
work.
trying to say, yes.
Yeah, that'll work. I.e., 6 a.m., 12 midnight, weekly deliveries for employees. If you want to get real specific, but I think you don't need to.
Yeah, I don't think that needs to be in there.
I don't think so.
Steve, did you want to add something?
I don't know if you remember back when Linda Wise was the secretary of the board, and she came to all the meetings. And when the board made a motion, she would actually read that back to make sure that,
As
so,
he
Yeah.
tried to do.
right.
That was good.
Yeah, because, and as I mentioned before too, that, along with your going through the findings, is very important if there's ever a challenge to any of your decisions. And that's why, in the past, I think it was a lot more formal about that, what exactly the motion was, and going through the findings. So I just encourage you, just to remind you
stay
again, it's
formal.
very, very important
Okay,
to go through every one of those findings and make some kind of comment about
yeah,
it.
right.
Thank you.
Well, we try, and we will be doing that. So we have, do we have a motion and a second, and we're all comfortable with the way the motion came out? Okay.
Except maybe Mr. Eschenbach.
Please read back. No.
He did.
You comfortable? Yeah, we're all comfortable. Okay. And I think I am too. All right. Then, shall we consider the findings then? What is the practical difficulty or undue hardship involved here?
Well, I think that the practical difficulty is that the area that could possibly, with some difficulty, be used for parking is constrained by the necessity of having landscaping, which would remove some of that parking. And I think, and this goes to the exceptional circumstances too, and usually I am not a person to argue for what used to be or what may in fact be in the future. I usually look at the code and say, this is what it is now, and I can't help what it used to be. But in this case, I think they are suffering some practical difficulty in some exceptional circumstances by the fact that the Union Street Cafe exited that property in a rather unexpected manner, and that other properties are grandfathered in this area almost exclusively. And
Yeah.
ordinarily, I would say, okay, the law has changed, and so you're going to have to comply,
To the
as,
point, isn't it?
as Mr. Morgan did. On the other hand, Mr. Morgan has residential property
Yeah.
with tenants,
Right,
with
it's-
cars that are permanent. And this is a totally different type of business, and it doesn't strike me as a type of business that's going to require the same kinds of deliveries or the same kind of use. So it seems to me apples and oranges, and I don't see that at all.
Well,
Let me
that goes
ask you a
down to
question to clarify something for myself.
Okay.
Let's say we grant the variance, that means they don't have to have any parking, right?
No, they have to have two.
Two.
They have to have right,
So
two
the two
parking.
already have, but we can't say 3 or 4, but not 6 maybe.
We could have, but we made a variance
Yeah.
that was for 2, and everybody didn't object at that
Okay,
point. So now
okay.
that's the variance. If we want to change it, we're going to have to move backward.
Yeah,
and-
that's
and-
what
Or
I
deny.
thought, because if we say granted, okay, 2 is enough, but maybe we could have had 3 or 4.
We could have, but we didn't make that
Okay.
motion.
Okay, that's fine.
Possibly.
Okay. And I do think we're talking here about preserving some fairly mature trees. And I do believe that it's in the public interest to do that, and that they would have to go, I think, for this to happen.
Well,
Or the
The
landscape
two
ordinance
out
would-
front, and then you can,
Two out front, and then I'm not sure what
Yeah.
to do about the ones on the side.
well, some of the ones on the side as well would have to go.
Yeah.
I think that that wouldn't, to my mind anyway, in a different part of this, but it wouldn't be, the intent of the code is not to destroy something that is, a public good in order to provide another
Right.
public good. The parking is is definitely in the public interest.
Well, and I think we've already heard that it would be virtually impossible to provide 6 spaces here. If you have a door that opens out, that eliminates 1 space. If you do the landscaping, that eliminates 2 or 3 more. So you're practically down to 2 or 3 anyway.
And if we say they have to have 6, then that's just going to pretty well preclude anyone having any kind of a business.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, and it's, the business has already been, the building has been vacant for so long that they lost their
So we would
grandfather
only
status.
succeed in keeping it vacant.
Right, I'm afraid that might be true. So I hear what Mr. Morgan is saying, but I think that we're talking about a different category of use here.
All right, we've done numbers 1 and 2. What about the preservation of equal property rights? You also sort of alluded to that when you were talking about
Well, yes.
the other
I mean,
similar businesses.
If you don't have anybody else on the street who is required to have parking because they were already there, once again, I usually am the person who's hard-nosed enough to say, okay, it says you have to have it, and so you have to have it. But in this case, I think it is a real difficulty to provide it, and you would be destroying some of the mature trees, which we do want, and you would be destroying some of the aesthetic of the business. And in this case, fair is not always equal.
Thank you. What about the minimum variance requirement?
I think at 2, it may not be minimum. If it was like maybe 4 or 3, it would have been minimum.
But, well, at 2, making reasonable use of the property.
You still can't
we
have
need
3.
to We need to make, there needs to be some adjustment made to make reasonable use of the property.
If there are typically 2 employees there at a time, they would be able to park there. If you have more people than that, they'll have to make some other arrangement. I'm assuming that like many other businesses of this sort in town, they'll be hiring some student help who will simply walk down from campus. So I don't know that, but that would be my supposition.
Yeah. All right, then what, would there be, what is the detriment? Is there any substantial detriment to adjacent properties? Well, our one adjacent property owner has.
Right, obviously there has been detriment to him, so we would hope that the new tenants would be more accommodating and more careful in operating their business than apparently the previous tenants were. And I think that certainly that's something that anybody who goes into that space as a business person would want to work out with the people next door who has been inconvenienced in the past.
Well, considering who the delivery person is for this business, I think he's very well aware that he's not to be parking over in the neighbor business, but.
We don't want to forget, do we, that they had the phone number and name and
Yes,
never made
I
an
meant to
effort
ask about that, about why there was no.
Perhaps
Yeah, I forgot to ask.
I want to get their variance, there would be any reason to.
Well, I'd like to expect best to know.
All right. The primary detriment was the parking situation with deliveries, and it seems like.
But if you in fact only need to have deliveries once a week, you can surely have the employees park elsewhere so the delivery truck can come on that day.
Yes. It also occurred to me that I imagine there probably will be times when students are moving in and out of that building next door, when the students will be parking in the parking place of the restaurant. I'm quite sure that there have been a number of times when students parked there, when they were overflowing. So these things happen. But the detriment, I think, is it can't be substantial if it's once a week. And
I would just also like to say that I've been on the board for a long time, and Steve can probably comment on this better than I can, but it doesn't seem to me that we've had too many cases in the uptown area where we have granted variances for people to have. It just hasn't come up. The variances where, the places where we've required people to have parking in the uptown area are places where we're talking about residential uses. I don't remember other uses that, where people came and asked us for a parking variance that we gave to them.
Commercial uses.
Certain commercial uses that didn't have residences attached.
yeah, well, the residential parking generally is the problem because it has to be 24 hours a day for residences. It's not, it's
That's a
not,
challenge for businesses here in Athens. You
Yeah,
open up a
sure
business, you don't have any place for your customers to park, and your business suffers. And it comes with Athens.
well, yeah, okay. Well, then, that means that it's not of a general nature.
Absolutely.
We should not, it isn't a situation that be more reasonably handled by changing the law? Do we need to change the law on this one?
think so.
No, okay.
Before you go on, I don't recall whether we gave him a last chance to say the last word or not.
We did.
Okay.
Yeah, we did. All right, well then, Greg, I'm going to start down at your end because you're furthest away from me.
I vote yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm going to vote yes.
Yes.
I too am going to vote yes. So you have your variance. You are really aware that your neighbor is going to be watching to make sure that you take good care that you don't infringe.
Try to be a good neighbor.
Okay. Okay. You're welcome. All right. The only other thing on the agenda this evening was approval of the minutes, but I think no one has had time
I
to.
did read them.
You did
I
read
read
them.
it.
I only saw one typo in there, so where will.
Well, it's really-
Fast reading bunch. All right.
Yeah, so
Well
they're
then,
fine as presented.
they're fine as presented. Then the minutes have been approved, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, guys.